Hello, welcome or welcome back to me. Today, I wanted to talk about a slightly different topic that has less to do with books or Formula One and more to do with just being a person in the world. In my case, a person that is not currently living in the country that she's originally from or has citizenship for. People like me are usually called immigrants or expats, and I have formed an opinion on what I want to be considered as and what I do not want to be considered as. And I wanted to talk about that. Before I go further into it, all of this is just based off of my own opinion, my own perceptions, kind of my impressions I've gotten, rather than like empirical evidence or fact-based research. This is not a video essay, this is just me talking. I want to make that very clear, unless obviously I cite a source, in which case that's the source. To start with, I think it's always good to have a definition of what you're working with. I went to my favorite source, Wikipedia. Immigration is the international movement of people to a destination country, of which they are not usual residents or where they do not possess nationality in order to settle as permanent residents. And the definition of expat or expatriate, is that how you pronounce it? An expatriate, often shortened to expat, is a person who resides outside their native country. So when I read that, I was like, okay, so it's the same thing. There's no actual difference in the definition. But like our use of them is actually quite different. At its like very basic, it seems that expat has a positive or if anything neutral connotation, whereas immigrant has a negative one or at best kind of neutral. So to me, the main distinction is that it's used for different groups of people. Note that I'm not saying by different groups of people, because I think there's a difference also in who uses which term about themselves, largely probably influenced by what they are being called anyway. Expat seems to be used for affluent, middle, or upper class people. I don't ever see it being used for working class people. Whereas I would say immigrant is used for people where we presume that them immigrating is improving their life in some way. For expats, I feel like that's not necessarily the case beyond like I just wanted to move there kind of improvement. It is important to note that I think that's just a perception. Whether it actually improves their lives measured by whatever sort of metrics is a different question. From my observation, essentially, people for whom the move was entirely optional and they wouldn't have had a bad life experience if they hadn't done this, they are being called expats. So it seems that every expat is also an immigrant, but not every immigrant is also an expat. I think immigrant has a more negative connotation for a couple of different reasons. And I think those are important to talk about. So there's obviously the very classic argument where people think that immigrants are taking their jobs or alternatively are taking their tax pounds by using the welfare services, taking more than they're giving in the country that they are now residing in, which is sort of an economical fear. And then there's also the fear that like the dominant culture of the country that is being discussed is being changed by other people with other cultures or other traditions moving there, which is sort of more of a cultural fear. I think those are the two main reasons the term immigrant pops up with like a negative connotation in the news. I would like to say that I think those arguments are horse shit. But most importantly, if we're being real honest, the foundational reason for these is racism. And in North America and Europe, at the very least, if not elsewhere as well, it's Islamophobia. So this actually shows more clearly what the term expat is used for. And I'm going to read this out because I feel like the way I wrote it down is better than the way I can put it by trying to paraphrase myself. So, citing myself, expat seems like a word that is born out of a desire by affluent people to distinguish themselves from people who immigrated for a better future, working class people, and often people of color. It's fundamentally a classist and racist term, so that white rich people don't have to think of themselves as the same as working class black and brown people. As a generalization, of course, but that's, in my opinion, the gist of it. Obviously, that's not something I would personally like to identify myself with, so I'm not an expat. You could consider me an expat on a basis of definition, since it's extremely vague, but it's not something I would call myself or I want to be considered. I'm an immigrant. I want to be mindful of the fact that I do not have the same experience as a lot of other immigrants. For example, I'm not being perceived as other in passing in the street because I'm white And unless you hear me talk or I disclose it, you don't know that I'm not British, because that's just the assumption people make. And it's important to say that in that way, those are also things that can happen to British citizens who are just not white and therefore are perceived to be other. I'm also an EU citizen, so I know that the rules for me to stay in this country are a lot less harsh than they are for other people who do not have EU citizenship. And I also don't have the same fear of being deported, my visa getting rejected, any of these kinds of issues that a lot of other people face. Let me say this as also someone who has come from a country that a lot of other people immigrate to. If you were born in a country that other people seek to immigrate to, then see that as what it is, which is luck of the draw. It's not an entitlement, and it's not a personal achievement. So I think in summary, the fact that I could also be called an expat doesn't mean I should use that to distinguish myself from other immigrants, to make it look like I have a better reason to be here, or to just distinguish myself from people that I think I'm better than. That's racism and that's classism. Instead, I think it is a way better use of my time, but also just kind of my responsibility to stand in solidarity with other immigrants and fight for them, with them, so that everybody can have it as easy as I've had it. I want to give a small shout out, I don't know if she's going to see this, to one of my best friends. I've thought about making this video for a while, but she's the one who encouraged me to do that just now. Yeah, that was my little piece about why I think no one should ever use the word expat again. This wasn't a rebuttal of anti-immigration talking points. That wasn't the purpose of this. Instead, it is more to encourage everyone to think about the language we use, because in a lot of ways, even if we don't intend for words to have that connotation, they end up being used in a way that is, for example, in this case, racist, classist. So I like to change my language when I learn these things. I'd like to encourage anyone else who is in the same position and technically an expat to maybe just consider not using that word and instead calling yourself an immigrant, because that's what you are. Thank you for watching. I promised a more entertaining video this week. Not sure I delivered, but I thought this was important to talk about. So I hope you, enjoyed? Question mark? Maybe it made you think. That would be nice. But either way, thank you for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.